It's that time of the year again, guys. Even though I generally detest winter as a season, I am fond of snow. Even though it's becoming increasingly rare where I live. Because I live in a sort of temperate climate anyways. Where it's neither very cold nor very warm in winter, but just boring. So, guess here's a little wholesome snow video for you, showing some of the scenery, and maybe, just maybe, a little bit talk about insects, just to keep this relevant. For my YouTube channel at least. Now some of you may be wondering, how do insects survive conditions as harsh as these? Especially since they're cold-blooded animals that rely on external warmth for their metabolism. Well, that's because in their blood, at least the ones that overwinter as adults or caterpillars, have a chemical in their blood, or I shouldn't call it blood, I should call it hemolymph, because that's what it is. This chemical is called glycerol, and glycerol, it acts like an antifreeze, which prevents water in the cells of the insects from becoming solid. And even though its body temperature is still lowered, the fact that the water doesn't become solid or freezes prevents cell damage. Because as you know, ice has a bigger volume than water. So when water freezes, it expands. And this expanding is what kills most animals when they freeze to death. It's basically the water expanding and destroying the cells. This glycerol prevents this, and this is why some butterflies and moths can remain dormant for all winter until spring comes and they thaw. And when they warm up, it's like nothing happened. The only thing that this glycerol doesn't prevent is the fact that they need external warmth for their metabolism to function. So they're still inactive when they're cold and are unable to move. But at least they don't freeze to death. Of course, the thing I just told you about glycerol, it doesn't apply to all of them. Not each single insect has the same survival strategy. And in fact, there's only a small percentage of insects that use this strategy to begin with. But it's one of the many that insects use to overcome the cold. So I thought it would be interesting to mention. Of course, if we look like reptiles and other cold-blooded animals, even though they're not invertebrates, they have other strategies. For example, amphibians, instead of having antifreeze in their blood, they have extra space between their cells. And this space between their cells is called intracellular space. Now when water expands when it freezes, as I told you, it expands, so it grows in volume. So instead of antifreeze, some animals have extra intercellular space. So this expanding ice, instead of blowing up the cell from the inside out, because it cannot take the extra volume, this ice, it basically goes to the space, empty space between the cells, called the intracellular space. And of course, insects being cold-blooded, they don't use any energy when their body temperature drops. And while this makes them unable to move, it also has a big advantage. It means they do not use any energy at all when their metabolism is basically standing still because of the cold. And because of this, they can spend all winter in their cocoons, or as eggs, or as caterpillars, laying dormantly until things heat up and everything becomes warmer. What's also interesting is, triggered by cold, some insects have a facultative diapause or an obligate diapause. And the diapause is basically slang for a dormant stage. At this point I mean overwintering. And the difference is that insects that have an obligate diapause, well, they're basically forced to overwinter every year. And this is genetically hard-coded into them. For example, the European peacock moth, Saturnia peri, has only one generation a year because the cocoons must overwinter. And to break this overwintering, they need to experience a period of cold and frost. Well, they don't need frost per se, but they do definitely need the cold. And only after they have experienced this cold, the moth will develop and hatch from the cocoon. This is obligate diapause. If you keep these cocoons warm, then they will never hatch. They will die instead if they do not experience a cold winter. That means that the winter is so hard-coded in their genetics that they are unable to complete their life cycle if they cannot feel or experience the winter in some way. And they must overwinter, and there must be conditions that break this diapause. Now then there's also the facultative diapause, and facultative basically means it's optional. It's triggered by certain conditions only, and if these conditions are met, the insect will overwinter, otherwise it will not. A good example is the North American Io moth, Automeris io. Now, these moths are continuously brooded in the tropical areas of their range. For example, Florida. Florida is quite warm, and even the winters are mellow. This allows Automeris io to breed continuously throughout all the year. However, they have a very large range throughout all of North America. So in places like Canada or even New York, which is more far up north, here the insects will overwinter when they feel it's starting to become cold. But not because it's genetically hard-coded into them, but simply because they have a facultative optional diapause that in this case is triggered by the cold conditions. But if they would never experience these cold conditions, they would never overwinter. And that's a very important difference, because it means in some cases you can breed species in winter that will otherwise overwinter normally. But in some cases it will kill your livestock if you keep them warm all year. So that's something fun to experiment with all your breeders. And this video is not very serious, by the way. Guess I just wanted to film the snow. And I like talking to myself and to all of you. So it was just an excuse to get out. Now, if you find this subject interesting, then I will make a more professional video about this subject soon. And not me walking around in the snow and rambling. Maybe a video about insects and their metabolism relating to temperature or volatilism. Thanks for watching anyways.